Welcome back to Let's Make a Game, a channel about making computer role-playing games using the free program Twine and the Sugarcube format for Twine. In my last video, I displayed a color picture and a separate file, but the same picture, except turned from color to grayscale. And I said that I thought it was a shame that there was no command to display a picture but display it as black and white. And I got a comment that said that I was wrong, and there is a command that can display a color picture in black and white, and there are a lot of related commands that can do other things with the color of an image. So I'm going to show you some examples, and then I'll show you the code that allows it to happen. So here we have an original image, which I've chosen for having sort of very clear primary colors, I guess. And here we have a couple of examples of grayscale. We have 50% grayscale and 100% grayscale. Obviously 100% grayscale, it's completely black and white. 50% grayscale, it's still in color, but the colors are much more muted. There are other effects. There's sepia, which turns it into essentially sort of black and white with this black and white, but then with this sort of orangey brown overlay, kind of like an old photograph. There's saturated. You can make it more saturated, which is what I've done here, or you can make it less saturated, so it'll be duller. There's contrast, which is very similar to saturation, except it seems to sort of simplify some of the detail. It seems to sort of get rid of some of the detail, changing similar colors into being identical, and it also seems to make the blacks blacker as well as making the colors brighter. You can lower brightness. You can also make, I haven't done an example of this, but you can make images semi-transparent. We can make them completely transparent, but obviously that would be slightly pointless, but you can make them slightly transparent, and then they'll start to take on the color of whatever color or image is in the background. In this case, where it's almost black, having a semi-transparent image would look exactly the same as having a less bright image. You can also invert the colors, and again, there are degrees. If you do 50% inverted, that will just turn any image into a flat grey, because 0% inverted is the original image, 100% inverted is completely opposite. As you get closer to 50%, the colours get closer to being middling. It'll sort of get greyer and greyer, because if you combine a colour with its inverse, you get a medium grey. If you get to 50%, every colour is 50% the original colour and 50% its inverse, which means it will all turn into a flat field of grey. You can also blur. You can do drop shadow. You can rotate the hue. This is an odd sort of effect. You're meant to think of like a colour wheel, where you have, it's a circle with, let's say, we have red on the top and yellow here and probably green here, because it's probably using red, yellow, RG. No, sorry, it probably wouldn't be red, yellow, and it would probably be red, green, and blue, because it's probably using RGB colors, which are the color scheme for computer images. And then the other points are sort of combinations of those primary colors. And then if you rotate it a certain number of degrees, if you say rotate it 120 degrees, it'll sort of turn all the reds into greens, the greens into blues, and the blues into reds, and do similar to the intermediate colors. So it makes the colors different without changing the brightness or the contrast or anything. And here's an example of using multiple filters, and then I've got exactly the same effect, but I've achieved it in a different way, and we'll see the difference when we look at the code. And then there's a note at the bottom that says instead of percentages, you can use a number. So most of these, this one is in degrees. This one is the number. You always specify a number, and in this one it's in degrees. In this one it's actually a number of pixels. Blur is a number of pixels. Most of the others are a percentage. So if it's a percentage, it says instead of percentages, you can use a number. For example, 0.5 is the same as 50%. All right, and then there's a link to a website which just gives sort of all of the filters you can use and a sort of more formal definition of what each one does. So all of those are achieved with the one image file, just manipulated in different ways. So let's have a look at the code that allows that to happen. Oops, hang on. There we go. So I've zoomed in. So here we have a simple image command, such as I've discussed before, square bracket, img, square bracket, the address and name of the image, which in this case is image.png. It's in the same folder as the program, so there's no folder and a slash. There's not art slash, something like that. And then two end brackets. And then we have examples of how to do these filters. Now, these commands are not Twine specific commands. They are HTML commands, which means they will have this single less than to start with and a single greater than at the end. All of the commands that come from HTML have that sort of format. You might remember in the last video we were using tables and we had a single less than, a single greater than, and similar for the TR and the TD. That double one is for commands that are specific to Twine. So we use img, which is the image command. It's the equivalent of this command. It's the sort of print an image, basically. But we have this extra option. So the basic format of printing an image, if I wanted to print an image just using HTML, it would be like this. img src equals quote, in this case, image.png. That command would give the exact same result as this command. But the advantage of using the HTML version is that we have this other thing that we can do, which is we can give it a style, and one of the options we can give it within style is filter, F-I-L-T-E-R. So we have img style equals quote filter, F-I-L-T-E-R, colon, space, grayscale. Note that it's the American spelling of grey, G-R-A-Y, scale, S-C-A-L-E, and then bracket, 50%, end bracket. As I said before, you can use numbers instead of percentages. So I just find it a bit, I don't know, just mentally easier to instinct. It just seems more obvious to me what 50% is, I guess, than using a scale from 0 to 1. Grayscale 50%, and then we end that with a quote, and then we have the normal source. Then I've got an example of 100% grayscale, exactly the same format, just the percentage is different. Then I've got sepia, so instead of grayscale we say sepia. And most of these are exactly the same, really. There's only minor differences, but I will go through them. Saturate, that's the one that makes the colors bright, or you can make them less bright. In this case, I've done 200%, so it's sort of twice as bright as the original image, but you can make it, you could use this same command to reduce the saturation. Contrast, 200%. And there's a little note here that in this particular case, 100% gives the original image. In these cases, that's not true. 0% gives the original image. So if I'd put grayscale 0%, that would be quite pointless. It would just give me the original image. Yeah, so we have saturate, contrast, brightness. They all work the same way, with 100% being the original image. That's an example of making it less bright. We have invert. This is the one that was flat grey, just to demonstrate that 50% invert turns anything into a flat grey. This is an example of blur. Notice that one's not a percentage, but a number of pixels. So you can't use that same 50% equals 0.5, and you have to have px at the end. So 5px, meaning 5 pixels. You couldn't just put 5 like that. Then I've got drop shadow. This one's a little more complicated because it's got multiple specifications. There's how far is the shadow from the original picture, and there's a separate vertical and horizontal measurement if you want to have it like far to the side but not particularly far down. Then there's how much of a blur does the shadow have. If you have no blur, it'll just be like a rectangle. It won't really look so much like a shadow, because normally when we encounter shadows, they're slightly blurred compared to the, the object of which they are a shadow. And then finally we have the color, because of course if I had a black color, you wouldn't see it. It would still be there, but it wouldn't really show up. Then we have hue rotate. Note that you have to put DEG for degrees. If you just put 120, it won't do anything. It won't cause an error, but it'll just show the image, the original image, basically. Here we have an example of multiple filters, of how you lay out multiple filters. So we've got hue rotate, invert, and brightness. I've rotated the hue 120 degrees. I've put 20% inversion on it, which will make it basically a little bit grey, and I've made it brighter than the original image. So you have, to do that, you have the less than, img, space, style, equals, quote, filter, colon, then you have the first specification and a space, and the second and a space, and the third, and if more, of course, a space, and then the next one, and then you end with a quote. So don't put, what you might think is that you would put these, because often that's how you separate things with when you're using styles. But no, this doesn't use semicolons. It uses spaces within that filter command. And then of course you have the source as usual. And finally, I have img class equals multi-effect within quotes, and source equals image PNG. And this prints an image that is exactly the same as what this does. But what I've done is I've put a command in the style sheet that lets the program know that whenever I have an img and I specify that its class is multi-effect, multi-effect isn't something that's built into the programming language. It's a word that I made up. I just specified, when I say img class equals multi-effect, I mean that I want you to do these specific things to the image. So let me show you how you do that. So there's two bits to it. First of all, you put this in the code of the main program whenever you want a picture of that type. And the reason for doing this is if you have lots of different filters, or even just one filter, and you have lots of pictures that are going to have the same filters and the same amounts, and so rather than sort of have this quite long code each time, you can just say, well, I'll specify a class, and then just use img class equals whatever every time I want it. And that also means that if you go 120 degrees isn't really working, let's try 110 or 100. Well, I don't have to change it in every example. I can just change it in the style sheet, and that will change every example of that class. So let's have a look at the style sheet then. We go story, style sheet, and I have img dot multi-effect. That's just the name I made up. I just have to make sure that this is exactly the same as this. If I made a mistake and put, say, multi-dash effect or something like that, it wouldn't recognize that it was meant to be the same one. So image multi-effect, curly brackets, and then filter, colon, space, and it's the same format as it would be if I was when I did it in here. So hue rotate 120 degrees, invert 20%, brightness 150%, and then a semicolon. I don't have to put that semicolon because there's only one line of stuff within these curly brackets, but you do have to put it if there were more than one, if I had something else other than a filter. But I try to put the semicolon in every time because that's just easier. If I put it in when it's not needed, then I'll put it in, I won't forget it when it is needed. And that is how you can how you can display a color picture as black and white, something that I thought you couldn't do and said you couldn't do in the previous video. I have fixed the code in the previous video, and I'm about to put a note in the comments of my previous video, just explaining that I was wrong and linking to this video. So that might be easier for you than manipulating the picture in a program like GIMP or Photoshop, and it certainly will lower your the size of your folders because you'll only need one picture rather than all the different versions of that picture that are grayscale or sepia tone or whatever. So I hope that was useful or interesting to at least some of you, and I hope you will tune in next time.